Thank you, ma'am. Take care.
Motoring 93 is brought to you by Quaker State. Quaker State, one tough motor oil. And Midas for brake, exhaust, suspension, and steering service. Trust your car to Midas.
If you're like me, you love to drive. It's a wonderful experience. But let's be honest, that experience ain't what it used to be. It is simply getting more and more frustrating to drive on today's highways. And I could give you a long, long list as to the reasons why. But hey, who's going to listen? Well, for starters, the Ontario Provincial Police will. Officers have been staking out the 401 outside of Toronto. Now, the sight of a police cruiser can usually be an unsettling experience for most of us. But in this case, drivers are more than happy to pull over.
Very good, thank you. Take care.
Well, this community-oriented traffic survey is the initial phase in our adopting community-based policing strategies to our traffic environment. And in this particular strategy, we're asking to work much closer with the community, in this case the motoring public being the commuter. And what we're trying to do is work closer with them to improve overall highway safety. We're asking, with questionnaires themselves, have questions identifying certain things like drivers' driving habits, like the time of day they drive to and from work, the driving habits that concern them about other persons' driving habits, and also information about O.P.P. services that they may not be aware of, as well as O.P.P. Safety programs like Survive the Drive or traveling loan programs, which is very helpful in promoting safety on highways. The way we have the system set up is that one day is for distribution purposes and the second day is for collection. But I'd like to also stress that on the distribution days, we're not physically stopping vehicles. It's on their own accord that they stop and offer assistance now. Like, we're not trying to create congestion. The idea is to cut down on congestion and that. But we haven't had no problems. Like you've seen before, people have stopped on their own, and we actually have people driving down the ramps with their hand out the window, because with the excellent support we've had from the media so far, people come down with their hand out the windows. We even had a lady at Highway 24 bring us muffins on the collection day.
Thank you, sir. Like to express your any pet peeves or anything?
We had 6,000 printed up, so I hope we have enough. And an example, like this particular ramp here in Guelph Line, we gave out over 1,000 yesterday. I only brought 1,000. Didn't think we needed any more than that, and we ran out prior to 8 o'clock.
So, man, what do you think of all this?
I think it's great. I think that we've got to get rid of some of this traffic. It's just too much. You know, like, I mean, sitting in traffic, wasting an hour and a half of time trying to get to Humber College. It's awful.
You got any beef yourself?
Yeah, about the...
Or drivers? Or...
Yeah, they don't know how to drive. They don't signal. They cut you off. You can drive 100 and you should be driving in the shoulder. Like, you cannot do the speed limit at all. It's not safe. It's not safe.
You know, I travel about 90,000 kilometers a year, so I've got a lot of insight on the road, and I like to be able to give it every once in a while.
What's it like out there? What's your beef?
My beef is a 401. If you're in the left lane and you're too slow, get into the right-hand lane. To me, that's the biggest cause of accidents. People going in and out and passing on the right, and I usually do about 110, and at that I'm in the right lane passing sometimes, and it just bugs me, it frosts me. That and people cutting off trucks. They need time to stop.
Have you learned anything while you've been standing out here from 5 to 8 or 8:30 in the morning?
One particular thing that does come to my mind very prominently is the fact there are still an awful lot of people that do not carpool. A lot of single persons in the cars driving by. And mind you, there are quite a few more carpoolers, but not as much as we would like to see to help decrease the congestion on the highways.
Every week on Test Drive I have my pet peeve. Well, when I did the Taurus SHO, I inadvertently made a mountain out of a molehill. Roll that videotape, Mike. My pet peeve on the SHO is very simple. Every time you engage drive, this thing automatically locks all 4 doors. Now when the driver gets out, that's not a problem, because every time you reef on the handle, it automatically unlocks this door. But when you go to get groceries out of the back, this one's still locked. Now why they wouldn't use the technology to unlock the doors that they're using to lock them is beyond me. Now if they're telling me that this is a security issue, we've got the panic button. Leave the darn things unlocked. I know if I buy the car, I'm going to remove that module. Following that, Ford phoned and explained that had I read the owner's manual, I would have seen that the solution lay with the keypad and not the module.
To toggle between the auto lock feature, first thing we have to do is put in a 5-digit permanent security code. Next step is press 7-8 button, then the 3 and 4 button, release the 3 and 4 button, and then release the 7-8 button. And you'll toggle between auto lock feature enabled and disabled. We chose the keypad because for convenience purposes, it's a much better method of than having another module in the vehicle.
Well, thanks to George and all those at Ford Electronics Manufacturing Corporation in Markham, Ontario for setting me straight about the keyless entry system. Stick around because when we come back, we have a real treat. We're going to take a look at the General's latest and perhaps greatest hit.
Test Drive with Graeme Fletcher.
This is the start-finish line for the Toronto Indy, a very appropriate place to open this week's test drive as we look at the 1993 Chevrolet Camaro. Now the Camaro will be this year's Indianapolis 500 pace car. That marks the 9th time for Chevrolet and the 4th time that the Camaro nameplate will lead the race cars around the Brickyard. The 93 Camaro is totally new from the ground up with vast improvements in every area. The LT1 engine found in the Z28 originally debuted in the 92 Corvette. The differences between the original and the one in our tester are minimal. Power is rated at 325 pounds-feet of torque and 275 horsepower. That is an increase of 30 horses over last year's Camaro. Several important factors account for the increase. A revised cam profile, free flow heads, high compression ratio pistons and computer controlled timing to name but a few. Crank up this fire breather and you're in for some serious fun. On the skid pad we clocked the 0 to 100k time at just 5.3 seconds and completed the quarter mile in 14 seconds with a terminal speed of 100 miles an hour. Now that is quick. This Camaro has been fantastic through the pylon test. In fact, I've been cowboying it a bit and almost forgot what we're supposed to be doing. But that aside, the one thing you notice about this thing, it is a very powerful car, meaning you can induce oversteer any time you want. But unlike some cars, this thing is not at all vicious. In actual fact, it's quite quiet and benign and very forgiving. When the engine truly comes on cam, which is somewhere around 2000 RPM, the sensation is somewhat like that experienced in an aeroplane as it takes off. The adrenaline rush has to be experienced. Thus far into our long-term test, fuel economy is running at an average of 22 miles per gallon or 12.8 litres per 100 kilometres. Stopping power is provided by a 4-wheel ventilated disc brake setup that features GM's award-winning ABS-6 anti-lock brake system. During the brake test, we required 112 feet to stop from 80k. The item worthy of note is that the ABS-6 system offers the same kind of brake performance and stability that many expensive cars boast, but at a fraction of the cost. Connoisseurs of the Camaro nameplate will remember the LT1 engine designation from the 1970 Camaro. This 1993 Z28 comes equipped with the 2nd generation of that engine. Now, as you can hear from this gorgeous exhaust note, it delivers everything it promises, and that is power and performance beyond belief. The suspension design is totally new this year. Up front is an independent short long arm design with gas shocks and anti-roll bar. while the rear is a multi-link setup with roll bar and a torque arm. This new arrangement betters the old system in every area, including ride comfort. The other thing that improves things immensely is the rack and pinion power steering. Control, on-center feel are vastly improved, as is the feedback when compared to the old recirculating ball steering box used in the past. Now when you factor in all these improvements and the Mammoth P245-50 Z-rated tyres, the trip through the pylon test was a memorable one to say the least. As actions speak louder than words, I'll let the car do the talking. Combined with the LT1 engine is a slick shifting 6-speed manual transmission. Now this thing is fully synchronized, including reverse gear. Add to that a very nice light progressive clutch and you have a drivetrain setup that is second to none and makes a very powerful car surprisingly untemperamental. Inside, the new Z28 comes fully loaded. The power mirrors, locks and windows are neatly grouped together by the door handle. The front seats are 6-way power affairs that are both comfortable and heavily contoured, which is just as well given the performance. There is a great sounding Delco Bose system and air conditioning. Both the radio and climate controls are a piece of cake to operate thanks to their logical design. On the subject of the climate controls, the air conditioning system uses environmentally friendly R134A refrigerant rather than Freon. This is the first GM car to adopt this non-CFC substitute. The dash is analog in design and complete in every respect. All information can be gleaned at a glance, which is a good idea given the punch the car packs. Lastly, and by no means least, the Camaro is the first Chevrolet to offer airbags for both driver and passenger. The trunk is limited, consisting of a black hole that comes with a privacy cover. If you want more room, the rear seat folds down, improving things immensely. The drawback being that now you can only carry 2 people. Summing up, the Z28 is very easy indeed. It's incredibly fast, it's very agile and a great deal of fun to drive. Most importantly though, it's very affordable. The way this car comes equipped at $23,700, that makes it a deal and a half and one of the best bangs for your buck around.
I was talking to Bill Gardner the other day and he told me that he's noticed some of his tools have gone missing from the garage. And you know what? Bill's not upset. Here's Bill to explain.
Well, you know, Brad, with the price of automotive tools and equipment, you want to be upset anytime anything goes missing from your shop. What I was getting at was the fact that we've got a lot of tools that aren't going missing, but they're starting to gather dust in the corner of the shop because we're just not using them for various reasons. Now, I mentioned last week one of those pieces of equipment was our brake lathe. Now, it's still a very viable piece of equipment, but we're finding for various reasons we're not using it as much. Now, for example, this brake rotor is heavily scored, deeply scored on both sides, and by the time we resurface that, it's going to end up far too thin to be safe. Or this brake rotor that looks good on one side but is terribly rusted on the other. And in case you think that's off a real old vehicle, it's off a 91 car with only 45,000 K. Another thing we found as well is that these brake rotors and brake drums have come down in price sharply over the last few years, so it's making it more and more viable to use new parts and get better performance out of that job. Here's a few more items that we're just not using as much anymore. We're using a little bit differently in some cases. For example, this digital volt-o-meter is still quite heavily used in our shop for testing electronic components, but there's a scale on this meter called the dwell scale that you would use for adjusting a car with ignition points. Well, there hasn't been a car for almost 20 years with ignition points, so I couldn't tell you the last time that switch was on the dwell scale. I don't know if it'd even still work. But in any case, here's another item. For example, carb cleaner. Now, we're not using near as much of this anymore because there aren't that many cars with carburetors. We are using quite a bit of it though for cleaning fuel injection systems, so it's being used a little bit differently. There's a tool there for adjusting ignition points on General Motors cars, but they haven't had that for 19 years now, so that tool is gathering quite a bit of dust. There's a tool for adjusting carburetor jets, idle jets. There again, something you just don't use a whole lot anymore. There's a wrench for adjusting distributors, for loosening distributors. That gets down and underneath the distributor, but there aren't a whole lot of cars today with distributors either. A few pickup trucks and the odd car, but that tool's kind of sitting around a lot these days as well. And for similar reasons, our ignition timing light isn't getting used a whole lot either. Now, it still has use on quite a few cars, but we're finding more and more cars without distributors, and the timing is 100% controlled by the engine management computer. So we just don't use this as much anymore. There's a tool called a valve spring compressor that's still quite viable for today's cars, but we're finding very few cars coming in these days with burnt valves or damaged valves. The odd one that gets bent when a timing belt goes, but by and large, that valve spring compressor is not being used near as much as it was in the early to mid 70s. Here's a set of feeler gauges that I'm sure most of you would associate with adjusting plugs or points. Well, about the only thing we use these for today is adjusting the valve lash on many high RPM 4-cylinder engines. So we still are using that tool. And in case you think some of these are going to go in the garbage, well, we've got to keep a lot of them around. And even for the ones that are totally obsolete, there's 10 new tools coming out to replace every one obsolete one. So every time that tool guy comes in the shop, he's got a bigger and bigger catalog under his arm. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 93.
Chevrolet's 1993 Corvette has marked its 40th anniversary with a special appearance package. The distinctive option includes an exclusive ruby red exterior and interior. Other features are color-keyed wheel centers, headrest embroidery, and bright emblems on the hood, deck, and side grills. The package is available on all Corvette models. Perhaps the letdown is that while distinctive, this special edition pales in comparison to the special that ASC put together. The ASC Corvette LT1 Spider was built to include an upgrade package that gives North America's sports car a fresh look. To say the car is orange is an understatement. Everything from the dash fascia to the brake calipers are bright orange. Even the seats have an orange insert. The vehicle was a joint venture between ASC and General Motors. Hot on the heels of these two cars comes news that the Corvette is locked in a life and death struggle to survive. General Motors top management no longer intends to throw good money after bad, meaning the chief engineer, David Hill, has got to make the Corvette pay for itself if the new model due in 1996 is going to arrive as planned. The main reason for putting Corvette on the chopping block is sales. In 1985, GM sold almost 38,000 Vettes. Last year, sales dropped to half that number. The pilot of a fighter jet communicates with his aircraft utilizing an advanced technology known as fly-by-wire. Well, Saab Scania, a company that began as an aircraft manufacturer, is developing a system known as steering-by-wire, or active steering, for its Saab vehicles. Instead of using a wheel to steer, active steering employs a joystick. In today's mechanical driving systems, a driver transmits his steering commands through the steering wheel, the steering column, and the steering gear to the wheels. Active steering cuts out the mechanical link between the driver and the wheels. Instead, the commands are transmitted to a microprocessor that relays the commands to the steering servo. The servo controls the flow of oil from the hydraulic pump to the steering gear. The signals from the joystick and from the sensors are collected and processed by the microprocessor, so the car and driver are provided with the correct information. The driver is outfitted with an armrest, not only for comfort, but it also prevents involuntary movement of the joystick when the car travels on a bumpy surface. Researchers say the system will be 100% secure. Every function is duplicated, so if one electronic system fails, the car will not be unsteerable. A reserve will always be there to take over. Saab does not expect this technology to reach production cars until well into the 21st century. One of the world's greatest rally drivers is Erik Carlson, whose many victories came from behind the wheel of a Saab. On a recent North American visit, we asked Erik his thoughts on driving with a joystick.
Yes, I have driven it quite a bit. And I must say, to start with, I thought it was really stupid. But the more you drive it, you get used to it. But I still want the steering wheel.
Erik Carlson also had some thoughts on modern-day rally driving and how that has changed.
It has changed a hell of a lot, but of course I should like to do it again if I can. But it has changed, and I don't think it has changed to the better. Maybe it's better for the driver, but I don't think there's have been any help really to production cars anymore. You know, in my days, when something went wrong, we could change it, we could get it in the production after a couple of months. But how the car looks today, I don't think they can even use the wheel nuts today on the production car, for there's so much special, you know. As you know, they're just special cars. They're nothing at all like what we are selling.
So rally car driving used to be a good tool to sell cars, but not anymore.
No, there was a good test truck, and we also sold car for what we used. I will not say we used standard cars, but all the parts in the car, they were modified, but they were standard production car. And at Saab, I know when I was driving, we tried to get other bits and pieces in, but our management, they always said, as long as we can use what we're selling, we can do competition. Or not, we stop.
With Washington pressuring Japan to buy American, the world's two largest car manufacturers may soon begin a new relationship that would see Detroit-based General Motors building cars for Toyota. Toyota is negotiating to buy as many as 20,000 U.S.-built GM vehicles annually to sell in Japan. The cars will be right-hand drive and sold through Toyota dealers under a Toyota badge. The model is likely to be the size of a Chevrolet Cavalier. At the moment, General Motors does not build a right-hand drive vehicle, but has said in the past it would produce a right-hand drive Saturn for export in the mid-1990s. There's no word yet if General Motors Canada would be involved in the proposed deal.
Our Midas tip of the week concerns an item that many people overlook when replacing their spark plugs. On many of today's cars we have aluminum alloy cylinder heads, and that spark plug can be in there for an awful long time. Many of the cars call for an awful long interval between spark plug changes. If that's the case, the spark plug can actually become seized in the threads and you'll damage the threads on the way out. So it's very important when you do have those spark plugs out to coat the threads of the plugs with anti-seize compound before you reinstall them. That's very important on today's cars, and that's going to save you a lot of time and possibly a lot of money the next time you service that car. Don't forget to do it, whether you're replacing them yourselves or having someone else do it. Insist that anti-seize compound go on those threads before you reinstall the plugs. That's your Midas tip of the week.
Kenzie's Corner with Jim Kenzie.
It won't be long before we have 1 million cellular phone users in this country, and don't they all seem to be dawdling along in the fast lane directly in front of you with their handsets surgically grafted to their ears? You know, everybody's got their own horror stories about what some jerk did to them on the road while the guy was arranging a squash game or selling some stock or talking to his girlfriend. Hello, is this squidgy? But you know, I'm not aware of any hard statistics that indicate that cell phone users have any more crashes than anybody else. But you know, with 1 million phones in this country, that's one for every 25 men, women, and children. I'll bet you some of you viewers have these things. Now, does your phone have a hands-free system that lets you talk and still keep both hands on the wheel? Well, if it does, when's the last time you used it? You know, in England, among other places, you have to pull off to the side of the road and stop before you can use your cellular phone. If we cell phone users don't clean up our own act, you know our government won't be far behind. I'm Jim Kenzie.
Well, that's it for this week. We want to thank the Ontario Provincial Police for allowing us to hang out with them as they conduct this survey along the 401. And you know, these officers know that this program is not going to come up with any miracle solutions to help make the highways a safer place to drive, but at least they're trying. Maybe that's good advice for the rest of us drivers. Maybe we should be trying a little harder to help understand the rules of the road. You know, it's a privilege to be out there on the highway driving, and it's not something we should take for granted. That's it for now. We'll see you next week for more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
Motoring 93 has been brought to you by Quaker State. Quaker State, one tough motor oil. And Midas, for brake, exhaust, suspension, and steering service. Trust your car to Midas.